I'm going to talk to you about things that were revealed to me on the way of becoming an architect, and the truth that was found in the process, and I hope that will resonate with fellow colleagues and people of different professions. But first, I would like to start with what I call breaking walls of perception. Each one of us has its own unique point of view, and it's that defines us. And when more than 2 points of view align, we start to talk about common sense. But how logical is that common sense? In the way of securing a position, I was told that my background was fantastic, but I was lacking experience. So at that point, it occurred to me, how can I get experience if I cannot secure positions to begin with? And I knew at that point I had to break free from that logic. I had to unfollow that sense of thinking, and I had to break that perception. So I started focusing on the things that I enjoy doing the most, designing and making things. But focus is a very difficult thing to do, especially nowadays. 95% of people struggle to focus. And if we think how we used to live 20 and 30 years ago and how we live today, we understand that through technology, we have the ability to move from the industrial age to the age of information. And the amount of information that we receive is so vast that we are unable to understand and decipher that information. As a person growing up, I was told that I always have to cross-check my sources. And in that sense, it wasn't only about the type of information that I was receiving, it wasn't about the amount of information, but it was also about the speed by which that information was reaching out to us. And it's that speed that is so high that it makes it even more difficult to start to evaluate, understand, and eventually make a decision based on that information, that it makes it feel like a Hercules labor. To my truth, technology, education, design were always interwoven. And they also had a little bit of shock. I started my architectural education on the onset of shifting from one design tool to the next. I knew how to draw by hand, and I started to use the computer. And that was a revealing moment for me, because I was able to draw a skyscraper in a matter of days, when it used to take a matter of weeks. And I could also have design changes included. Of course, that was a personal choice. I chose to develop myself, to master a skill, and in that sense, I progressed. I didn't wait for the tutorial day. I was teaching myself at any point I had the option to do so. And I started to feel like I was an awesome architect already. Of course, I wanted to apply the gained knowledge, and a person named Leonardo da Vinci once said, "I'm impressed with the urgency of doing. Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Be willing is not enough, we must do." And in a way that I would like to understand the world, I started working before even graduating. And that led me to the next revelation: real-world deadlines. Of course, that didn't stop me there. The passion for architecture drove me to advance myself, and I started studying in one of the top schools of architecture at the Architectural Association. And at that point, with my 5 years diploma and experience at hand, I finally began feeling that I'm that architect, the awesome architect. Reality struck back, and I realized I had many things to learn. And in that sense, I also realized that it is crucial to go through a process of designing, and as the design was sophisticated, at the same time it was essential to interact with other awesome architects. And while my design was very different from the design I used to do in my first year, now I was using code, it was more important that I interact and I talk to other amazing architects. And this is not a truth that is given to you. This cannot be taken by you. This has to be earned. And this is a universal truth. We fight against it, we try to deny it, but this is how it works, and we cannot start to dance if we don't start to walk first, unless if we are Shakira or Michael Jackson. My next adventure began when I started working with Zaha Hadid. At that point, I was already looking at architecture in the same way that Neo is looking at the built environment in the movie The Matrix. The sophistication in the design was matching with everything that I was teaching myself by then. And this is a render of the Nanjing Towers in China for the Youth Olympics. It has 105,500 square meters of conference center, 2 towers coupling at 258,500 square meters, and 100,000 square meters of basement areas. At the same time, there's a plaza that is terminating on the riverfront. And these are renders, and these are real photos of the project. Now, there's another building, the Opera Theater House in Rabat, and this is a project for the King of Morocco. The $120 million project includes an 1,800-seat theater, a 7,000 outdoor amphitheater, additional rehearsal spaces, and a 350-people restaurant. Now, this also has different design features. It has to represent its design features and at the same time be very functional and follow building regulations of the country. The interior of the theater is different, is crystalline, and it's inspired by the Moroccan makarnas. At that point, each line of the design depicted to me that I had to understand that they represent columns, slabs, and maybe even beams. Now, no matter how sophisticated that design was, the point to understand and remember is that I was already applying the things that I knew in an international team, in a team of different people with different backgrounds. And whoever has held a position in an office or had any work, they realize that they go through different moments and moments of adversity. And in the places that I teach, in London and in Oxford, there are mechanisms in place to help people deal with stress. And there's a point to understand here, that point comes to us by nature. And it comes to us in the form of a lobster. Recently, I understood how lobsters grow. Lobster from the family of Malacostraca is an animal that has a tough skin and a mushy, soft internal body. Now, the word Malacostraca, for those who speak Greek, is misleading because it doesn't have a soft exterior. It's only soft at the beginning of the molting process. It's very rigid and it doesn't expand. So when the lobster needs to grow, it has to go away, hide away from predators, and start to cast off that shell. Then a new shell is generated. The shell has the same features as the previous one. It can even regenerate lost limbs. And that process continues every time it needs to grow. Now, the point to understand is that the driving force for the lobster to grow is the feeling of being uncomfortable. If lobsters had doctors to prescribe medication every time they feel uncomfortable, they would never grow. Every time they would feel bad, they would go to the doctor. They would get an aspirin or a bubbling painkiller. They would feel fine, and they would never cast off their previous smaller shell. Now, the important thing to remember here is that moments of adversity are also signals for growth. And if we can understand those moments, we can also grow through those moments together. Now, the way that nature inspires me and to realize certain truths like this also becomes a reference point for me for the work, for the experimental work that I do in the programs that I run here in Greece, in different cities of Greece. And it has enabled me to also see architecture in a different perspective. And it has long been the work of many theoreticians to try and decipher how nature creates the abundance of shapes and forms that we see, from growing plants to emerging islands in the ocean. And thanks to the advances of technology, we are able to move and create a sophisticated design in the computer into one-to-one scale. Of course, there needs to be a certain purpose. We need to understand what is the purpose for creating something different, for creating something new. And if the purpose is superficial, if it is ephemeral, then if there is no plan, then it's very easy to fall into a vicious cycle where the value of our work is mixed and we misunderstand what we do and why we do it. And especially when we do things through moments of adversity and through a special growth, and we can grow through that process ourselves. Now, I would like to show you some details of the work, of the experimental work, and this is a photo of an unusual concrete pavilion, Calipod. Now, this is not a Photoshop image. This is not edited. It's a real photo. And the interesting thing about this is that it was put together in less than a week with the people of international students that just met each other, and they went through a process of looking at nature as a reference point. Now, to give you a hint on what that work looks at as a research background, I would have to talk to you about a school of fish swimming, or a flock of birds flying, or a herd of sheep traveling around. while the movement can be mesmerizing, it hides a certain purpose. It has a specific way that happens. They try to come together, not too close to each other, and they have a specific direction. Now, these are the basic flocking rules that were coined by Greg Reynolds in 1987. Other moments of inspiration by nature can be networks of bundling and branching. And this has been the case also for Kalipod. Now, the purpose here is not to recreate a moving animal or is not to make a plant. The purpose here is to understand how that way happens and to connect that way with design features where we don't understand, we don't know exactly how the final outcome will be, but we know what the final structure will do. And that has been a thrilling moment for me, because it wasn't just about how things were looking, it wasn't about how things were operating, but it was both. And every proposal grew from that process. Of course, here again, the trick is choice. How do you choose from a plethora of different options? You might know what you want. So, for instance, you might know how much sunlight you want to have, but there are different options of opening configurations that can give you that level of sunlight. So every time we go to the market to pick a tomato, we grab it, we smell it, we squeeze it, and in that process, we try to understand how that tomato feels and looks like, because we know that will be a parameter of how tasty our Greek salad will feel like, yeah? And in that sense, we go through a process of evaluation. Every great chef, usually a mother, knows which tomato is the best. Similarly to architecture, we go through a process of evaluation. So we make many different iterations, and this is the case for the programs that I run with the students who come in, make different design proposals, and we go through many different design proposals based on the brief, and we try to do that through a simulation, through using specific code, and at the same time creating prototypes at smaller scales, until the moment where we evaluate how these objects can be realized by using advanced technological tools, and at the same time understand how they behave structurally, how they stand. And in the case of Kalipod, we had to understand how the forces of gravity were affecting that shell. Eventually, a choice was picked, and that was gone to the next stage where it was created into one-to-one scale. We had to go from the three-dimensional geometry on the computer to a two-dimensional plan that will give us the formwork in order to start creating that pavilion. And what we managed to do is to cut out these pieces out of a piece of fabric. The piece of fabric was then used as the formwork for casting concrete. And we gathered earth that was the scaffolding for our structure. We created an earth scaffolding, we laid on top the fabric formwork, and the casting process began. We used a special concrete mix with fiberglass additives, and that enabled us to move away from conventional ways of reinforcement. We didn't have to use rebar. Eventually, this process continued by removing the earth scaffolding. The earth scaffolding was then out in the surroundings, and the final outcome was revealed. And this was done again in a matter of less than a week. The final structure is 2.1 meters high, 4.4 meters wide, and it was done by a group of people who just met each other. Now, I will show you one more example of experimental advanced architecture, and we try to challenge ourselves through these processes, and we try to see how we can change things and move beyond the things that we already know. In this project, WeaveX, we wanted to challenge the way that we use formwork, but also different design tools and fabrication tools, such as the Robotic Arm, as you will see. In this process, we began by creating protocols of information and communication with a tool that is usually found in the automotive industry, the Robotic Arm. And we had to sort of customize the way that it was moving and it was used in order to start bending that reinforcement to match the design purpose that we wanted to achieve. The revealing moment here was that we were able to very quickly generate a series of customized bends for the rebar that will eventually give us a very specific design that was not random, but it had a purpose. And through that process, everyone sort of started seeing a different perspective for architecture and the built environment. And by understanding materiality and how polypropylene was used for formwork, we began having unexpected results, such as a polished concrete surface that was done on the go without having to go through a second step of editing the structure. Now, in this way, the Ford's notion of mass production is met with the process of mass customization. However, there's always the need for a purpose. We need purpose to guide us and to drive us. If we don't do that, if we don't have purpose, then we fall easily into illusions. Perhaps the biggest truth here was that architecture, for me, is a way of life, a way of thinking. And as long as there is passion, then we can overcome many moments of struggle. And there have been many moments of negative feelings. For instance, in the first, here I'm showing how the mass customization can be met with the 3D personal machines. But to go through the moments of negative feelings in the first project, there was a moment where part of the air scaffolding collapsed under our feet, and we had to make a decision at that point to continue and not stop. At the same time, when we started to talk about communicate with the robot, it felt like we were talking to a wall. There was no response, zero. But we didn't stop, and we realized at that point that we have to put ourselves into place and surround ourselves with people that understand what it means to have persistence and perseverance. And at this point, I didn't come here to talk to you about how we're going to move ahead, how this will progress. I came here to show you a world with possibilities, a world without boundaries. And in that world, in order to have your place, you have to try. You have to begin and remain active. We'll be happy to have you with me. And in this sense, I would like to tell you how grateful and privileged I am to have told you my truth, such as it is, and how we go from here. It's a choice I leave to you. Thank you.